All right, so this is a new series on service workers. This first video, we're going to be talking about core concepts to service workers, the life cycle, how to register one, how to unregister one, and how to use the dev tools across Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. So let's dive right in. The link right here to the MDN web docs about service workers, I posted this link down in the description, and the code that we're going to be using through this video, the finished version of it, is also linked to down in the description. All right, let's jump right in here. Here's the very simple website that I've got. There's an HTML file, CSS inside of a folder, my app.js file inside of a folder, and then I've got this file right at the root. This is going to be my service worker. Right now there's no content in there whatsoever. And first thing that we need to do whenever we're using a service worker is register it. So how do we do that? Well, we jump right in here with navigator.serviceworker. Now, that's what we're checking for right here. We're looking inside the navigator object to see if there is something called service worker. And we're going to call a method register. Simple enough. And it needs to know what is the file that you're going to register as your service worker. And there's an optional options object that you can pass inside of here for the scope. Now, the default scope is what we're going to use, and honestly, it's what you should be using most of the time. By putting it at the root of the website, I'm saying that this service worker is allowed to control anything inside of here. If I were to put this service worker inside the JS folder and link to it that way when I register it, it means it's only allowed to control HTML files that exist inside of this JavaScript folder and everything inside of it. We don't want to do that. We want it to run our entire website, so that's what we're going to do. Now, once we have registered this, this is going to return a promise, or once we call the register method, it's going to return a promise to us. So we can say then, if I can type then, there we go, and it's going to return a registration object. This registration object is sort of representing the registration process, and it's got three properties inside of it. One called installing, one called active, and one called waiting, because these are the three places that the service worker could be, and it moves from one to the other. So we're going to take a look inside of here, and I'm going to save a reference to my service worker that I just registered inside this property that I've created here. So app.sw is going to be equal to my registration object, but not the registration object itself. It's the service worker that I want to save. So that is either going to be installing, or it will be registration.waiting, or registration.active. So these are three properties inside the registration object, and each one of them is either going to be null, or it will be the reference to the service worker itself. Once I've got this, let's put a message in here. There we go. So it's registered. When I run this, I would expect to see this message right away because the browser is going to support this. Now my service worker, there's nothing inside of it, and that's fine. It would register this empty file, but just to show that it is working, there we go. We're going to do that. So we're going to save this change inside this file, and now we're going to register that file as our service worker. Done. Now let's jump over into the browser. Here's our web page, and if you go to the application tab inside the development tools, you can see there is a service worker section. Right here, source sw.js. That is our service worker, and it says number 701 is activated and running. Great. So we have a service worker that's active and running. And the cool thing about service workers, what sets them apart, part of what sets them apart from web workers, is that with a web worker, we've got one file attached to one HTML file. So one JavaScript file attached to the web page. If I was to open a new tab with another web page, it would get its own web worker, and every single page that we open gets its own web worker. Service workers are meant to be kind of like proxy servers. They're one file that looks after whatever your origin is. So this domain name, this port number, this protocol, this service worker is responsible for that. That's why we gave it a scope to say anything inside of here, that's what the service worker is responsible for. We can now open up multiple tabs. So I'm going to copy this. I'll open up a brand new tab. And if I come in here, not source, I want to inspect that. Go to the application tab. We can see 701. It's the same service worker is activated and running. So every single tab that we've got, it's going to be able to access that. And now over here on the original page, I just refreshed it. This service worker is aware of the fact that, hey, there's actually two tabs right now, two clients. These two tabs are both under control of this service worker. They are the clients for this service worker. Now, that's in Chrome. If you are working with Firefox and you want to see this, we can jump over there. In Firefox, can I refresh? Yeah, we're good. We've got service worker under this origin. It is currently running. The little green light, it's running. We're good. We can unregister, which be deleting it. Back over here, back in Chrome, there's an unregister link right here. We could delete the service worker that way. If I unregister it, there we go. It has been deleted, but as soon as I refresh this, it's going to re-register this thing again. So we've got it up and running. Now, stopped, don't be confused by that, just means that it's not doing anything currently. So it's sort of in this pending state. And in Safari, Safari doesn't have anything in its development tools for service workers. It does have a storage tab where we can look at cache, we can look at, local storage, session storage, cookies, app cache. This is the old thing that came before service workers. Briefly, for a few years, there was this idea of an app cache to be able to build apps that run offline. But that's been nixed. It's gone. Don't worry about that. It's kind of like WebSQL was around for a short while. Now, index databases have replaced that. However, in Safari, if you are looking to take a look at your service workers and see what's happening with them, in the development menu, or the develop menu, there is this right here, service workers, and we can click on that. It will open up a brand new web inspector that has its own console, that has its own sources. I think this is an old one that I had. This is the one that we just registered. Yeah, here we go. So service worker running, there's the very tiny text. Service worker running, that was coming from the service worker itself. If we jump back in here, in our service worker, that was our message. So we see that in this separate panel. Sources, there it is. Network, if you want to watch what's going on, you can watch all the network requests from the service worker itself from in here. Okay, so that's Safari, Firefox, Chrome. They all have the ability to look at this. They all have the ability to run service workers. Now, we've got registration. Now, let's talk about these different states. Right now, we've got this one service worker right here. It's activated. Jump back in here. If you want to see if your page currently has a service worker running, so we've got the code, we've done the registration, but if at some point in the future, maybe you've got a different page that doesn't have this registration on it, you just want to know, hey, do I have a service worker currently? We can do that as well. We can do an if statement to find out if there is one. So navigator.serviceworker.controller. This is the object right here. back into my console. So we do have a service worker installed. The service worker is registered. It went through that registration script that we had. Now, this one's happening after this one because this one was running with a promise. So this started, but then this was the next code on the main stack. When this was completed, it was able to go back and do the resolved promise. So the controller, this is our reference to the service worker. Now, if I want to know when a new service worker is installed and activated, that's going to be our next step here. And actually, not just installed, but and activated. So a new service worker is now taking control of the page. Maybe there's something I need to update on my page based on that information. I can do that by listening for the onControllerChange event. So start with navigator.serviceWorker as always. Now I can use addEventListener and listen for controller change, or just use onControllerChange. It's going to work either way. And inside of here, this is going to let me know that yes, in fact, we do have a new one installed, so and activated. There we go. Jump back to the page. Now, am I not seeing this message here? I refresh. I'm still not seeing that message about the new service worker activated. If I come here, I've still got that same one up and running, number 708. Let's come back into here, and I'll just make a change. Oh, I actually have to type something. There we go. Made a change. Now, there we have it. The new one is installed, and it's waiting to be activated. Come back in here. So service worker's running. Great. So the service worker is running. It's installed, it's registered, but don't have a new one yet. If I hit skip waiting, that's going to get rid of the old one and install the new one. There we go, 709. Come back to the console, and sure enough, now we have a new service worker that it's been activated. A new service worker is now in charge of the interactions on our page. Now, this page didn't have to refresh. So we've got two threads that are running here sort of in parallel. We've got the service worker thread that's running the service worker script, and then we've got the main thread. So the web page has got a thread for its JavaScript, and then the service worker, it's just like we've got one here and we've got one running over here. If this one gets replaced, that's fine. It doesn't mean that this page has to be refreshed. This is still using whatever JavaScript was loaded when the HTML was loaded. But the onControllerChange event got passed from here to tell it, hey, you know what? I've got a new version of my script running on my thread. Would you like to do something with that? That's why we have this event to pass it over. Now I've got a few ways that we can activate it here. If we make a change in our script, let's do this again. There we go. So we've got a new version that's installed and waiting. We can click on this link. We can click on Update on Reload. By doing this, it's a good option if you're working on your development and you're making lots of changes and you want to be able to see them. I just have to refresh my web page, and that's going to force the old one to be deactivated and the new one to be activated. So if I hit refresh, I'll do this a fair bit when I'm developing. But we can't expect our users on the websites to open up the DevTools, go to Application, go to Update on Reload, check this box, or click on Skip Waiting. The only time that that is going to happen is when all the instances, all the web pages, all the windows, all the tabs that are running this domain, that are tied to this service worker, when all of those are shut down, that's when the service worker can be replaced, and not until that happens. So here, if I open up a new tab with this, we've got the same service worker running in both tabs now. If I come in here and go to the Application tab, 711, 711, it's the same service worker in both places. Here, let's just shift this over slightly so we can see that it is the two different visually. Now if I create a new service worker, now we've got one being installed here. If I come over to the other tab, Yeah, sure enough, 712 is waiting to be activated in both places. I can close one of these, and it's still going to be the same. Even if I hit refresh here, 711 is still going to be the one that's in charge. It's not until I close all tabs. Now, if I come back, I reload this. Now, 711 should be gone, and 712 is now activated. So we do have the next one being activated, and that's going to just happen by default for us. That way the user of the website doesn't have to know anything about these tools. They just, when they shut it down, now the browser knows it's safe to introduce the new service worker script. Okay, so that's the life cycle. We've got this installing, activating, waiting, sitting there waiting to be activated. These are the different states, and this is when the browser knows it's safe. When the developer uses this, or clicks on skip waiting, or when the user shuts down everything. Now, if you do want to unregister it programmatically, it is possible to do that. We can come in here and unregister things ourselves. We can say navigator.serviceworker.getRegistrations. This is a method. It returns a promise. And it will return to us an array of all the registrations. So all the service worker registrations. We can loop through that. And then for each one of these, we can call the unregister method, which is also a promise. There we go. So this is going to actually unregister the service worker for us. Page loads, and when it gets to this point, it says, okay, go find all the service workers that are registered. Give me an array of them. I'm going to loop through them, and I'm going to call unregister on every one of them. And then it's going to give me a Boolean to say whether or not it worked. And 712 has been deleted. It has been unregistered. That's what unregistered means. It means deleted. I don't need it anymore. And there's the true saying that yes, it was unregistered. Now, this is not something that you're going to want to do very often. I can't think of an instance where I actually have done this programmatically. But it is possible if you do need that, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to come back to the messages from the service worker. One last thing that I want to show you in this introductory video is, okay, great, I've got a service worker. I know it can run a console message, but what does it actually do? What can I do with the service worker? How do I get it to do things? So there are a few things to know. First, when you are in a service worker, there is a variable called self. This represents the service worker itself. There it is, self, service worker global. And this is showing up now from the service worker because I did delete the old one. So there was no service worker. We ran this script right here, which deleted the old one. So there was none there blocking the way for our new one. If I make another change now, it's not going to show up. All right, this is my service worker right here. And we can see here's all the properties. There's a ton of stuff inside of a service worker. We basically have access to most of the things that you would in the window object. There's a few things we don't have permission to get to, like we can't access anything having to do with the web page itself. So the DOM, that's completely out of touch to us. But we can access servers. We can send fetch calls from service workers to get files. We can use cache storage to cache files. So we can have our service worker act as if it's a little proxy server and save things. The client's API will use that to send messages back and forth between the service worker and the web page. We do have things like location. We do have access to this information, but the stuff that's on the web page itself, we're not allowed to touch that. Okay, so that's our self object. Great. So that means when we're adding listeners, we're going to be adding them to self. So this is the worker, and we can add event listener. We can listen for the install event. We can listen for, I'm just going to copy this. So here's the different events that we're going to get. So there's install, there's the activate event, there's a fetch event, and there's a message event. Okay, so here's all of our main events that we're going to be listening for, and these are all extendable events. So I'm going to be talking about extendable in a future video, but we have these 4 main events that we're going to be listening for. Installed. Okay, that's the new one. If we come over here, 715, this is the one that's installed. It's the only one that has these console log messages. The old one didn't have any of these console log. It had none of this code. So this message is coming from the new one. So I know that the install event did happen. So if I want to do something like cache a new set of files to use in the future, I can do that in the install event. If I skip waiting and we jump back to the console, there we go. We've got installed, new service worker activated. So that was in our main script. And we've got activated here, knowing that this happened. So my service worker is installed and it's activated. My web page knows that a new service worker was activated. And if I refresh my page now, we're going to actually be able to see the HTTP requests that are coming from the web page. So what requests are there? Well, the HTML file loads, and then it wants to load the CSS file, and it wants to load this JavaScript file. So we should be able to see those when I refresh the page. There we go. So it's no longer installed or activated. Those things happened in the past on the the service worker's own thread. Here, the web page was refreshed, so this JavaScript was rerun, and here's the requests. So we've got the refer was the HTML file, and what did it ask for? It asked for this URL, the main.css, and down here, the app.js. So those are the 2 files that the HTML file asked for when this web page was refreshed. And those are the 2 requests that were intercepted by our service worker. And that really is where a lot of the power from service workers comes from, because we can tap into this fetch event. We can tap into the install event to cache files. We can use the activate event to get rid of old cached files. We can intercept the fetch calls to decide, hey, do I want to get a file from the cache, or do I want to send a fetch to the server from here and I can get a brand new file? Or do I want to save something in the IndexedDB? Do I want to retrieve something from the IndexedDB? Do I want to just generate my own response and send that back to the web page? That's another thing we can do. So these are all things that we're going to be talking about in the rest of this series on service workers. So I hope that has piqued your interest, and watch for the next video coming in this series. And as always, thanks for watching.